Svetozar Gligorić is generally considered to be the greatest Yugoslav/Serbian player in the history of the game. He was born February 2nd, 1923 in Belgrade. At the time, that would have been the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And he passed away in his home city 89 years later on August 14th, 2012. His life was widely regarded as a key figure in the development of chess in his native country. He won the championship of Yugoslavia a record 12 times. 12 times he was national champion. Svetozar Gligorić. We have e4 and c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight c6, the old Sicilian, but of course we're going to get an open Sicilian. After d4 and pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight f6, knight c3, d6, excuse me, that's e6. d6 is the classical variation, and of course, Sozin's attack with bishop c4. Bishop d7, bishop b3, pawn g6, pawn f3, and Gligorić played a novelty here, knight a5. When I say a novelty, I mean it's a move that had never been played before he played it here. Now, Luis Marini played this against Bobby Fischer the following year. He lost as well. The book move is knight takes knight, and then queen takes knight is answered by bishop g7. But Gligorić trying this little novelty here, hitting this bishop, bishop g5. Now, Bobby liked playing this move. I assume he wants to provoke the pawn to h6 because he always comes back to e3 eventually. But Gligorić with bishop g7, now queen d2, and sure enough, h6 is played and bishop e3. Rook c8, get that rook on the open file. Queenside castles, nice battery here. Knight c4 hits the queen. We were expecting him to give up his knight for the bishop. You can also play the prophylactic a6, and that prepares pawn b5. Knight c4 can come later. a6 gets a star, so good for me. Knight c4 is the move that was played, and Bobby plays queen e2, wanting to hang on to his bishop. Bishop takes being recommended. And the reason you'd want to take the knight is if you want to keep your dark-squared bishop. And we have every reason to want to keep our dark-squared bishop because it's our good bishop. So the bot says, take that with your light-squared bishop and keep your dark-squared bishop in your pocket. And then get your king out of the line of fire is what I would play here anyway. And I would get a check mark. Queen e2 was played, giving up the dark-squared bishop. Knight takes bishop, queen takes knight. Black castles, and now pawn g4 is played. Queen a5, right? Queen b6 is a better move. It pins the knight to our queen, and thereby it threatens pawn to e5, attacking the pinned piece. Gligorić with queen a5. Now h4, e6, and we get king's knight to e2 here. That gets questioned. The bot calling for king b1. I actually liked the idea of attacking my opponent's knight with pawn g5. And if takes, then we're going to take with this. The bot says don't take, but I'm saying if takes. But reason the bot's saying don't take is because, I guess, because this is opening if you do. So instead play here. Keep that line closed. Keep that pawn blocking his own rook. All right. Anyway, king's knight comes to e2. Now rook c6 gets marked with a double question mark. Knight e8, the superior move to defend that pawn rather than with the rook. This comes with the added benefit of opening the long diagonal for this bishop on g7, doesn't it? Well, rook c6 was played. Yeah, see, that blocks my bishop, which is already bad. Much better is the knight. g5 hits the knight. H takes g5. H takes g5. I get that open H file. Knight to h5. Now pawn f4, and Gligorić doubles his rooks on the open file with rook fc8. King to b1, queen b6, queen f3, rook c5. Now, the point of rook c5 is to prevent pawn f5, but the bot calling for a5. And the idea of that move is to capture the knight on c3. And the point of capturing the knight on c3 is eventually this pawn captures, and then that bishop gets pinned, and then that pawn can come to a4, attacking the pinned piece. Okay, for example, let's do some supposition here. This was not played. a5 was not played. He played rook c5. But let's suppose to a5, white plays rook to f1, a reasonable move. I mean, you can see that move being played. Let's put it that way. Well, now rook takes the knight. Double exclam, thank you very much. And the point is, after knight takes the knight, and bishop takes the knight, and pawn takes the bishop, okay, that creates a pin on this bishop, so a4 can be played. Bada bing, bada boom. So that is why the bot was calling for a5. Gligorić, wanting to prevent pawn f5, played rook c5. Queen d3 here. Ooh, yeah, that's interesting. Take the knight. That is really interesting. And get this. All right, let's come back to what was actually played. Queen d3. Now bishop takes the knight here. Pawn a5 being called for again. I thought bishop b5 should be considered here. That's going to force the knight to take. You don't, let me point out, you don't want to take this pawn. You do not want to play queen takes pawn, queen takes queen, rook takes queen, and allow the bishop takes knight here. But bishop b5 would compel knight takes and queen takes. And white has the splinter's edge according to the eval bar. Now, if you are worried about this pawn, you could just play queen c7, I would suppose. I get a check mark for that idea. Well, bishop takes knight was played, and knight takes the bishop. Now knight takes the pawn on f4, saying, I'm going to attack your queen. Note that the idea of rook takes knight is still on the board, by the way. So I feel good about myself for having seen that earlier. Of course, without the pawn on a5, its teeth are not as sharp. And then take this, probably. After queen takes, rook takes, and then defend the bishop, or move the bishop to safety. Or, I suppose, queen c7 would be an option here as well, as I showed on the previous. That should still be good, right? No, it's marked inaccurate now. All right. Well, anyway, knight takes pawn was played, interrogating our queen, and queen to f3 says, what are you doing, man? You're just opening lines. We don't want to play, by the way, queen d4, thinking that we're going to get an attack here, because that's just going to be blocked with the knight's return to h5. Which is what he plays here anyway. Well, look at that eval bar. Bobby going ahead now and sacrificing the rook on h5. Pawn takes, queen takes. And we're going to get rook h1 and checkmate, right? Or at least it's threatened. Now, you could still try. It's desperation now. You could still try this, but it only works. Look, the threat is rook h1. So you might want to play. He didn't play this. He played bishop e8. But the hope is, if you're going to play rook h1, white, let me take and ask you to play rook h1, threatening checkmate. But you notice the eval bar dropped way back toward the center. And the reason is that black can now play queen d4, covering the h8 square. So it would have been worth a try. Now, of course, if rook takes, white doesn't play rook h1. He just plays g6, and everything's Jim Dandy. I've got check followed by mate being threatened. If you defend the f-man, well, now I'll pick up the rook, and I'm looking great. But my point is it's worth a try, because sometimes chess players get in a rut mentally. We got this plan of playing rook h1, queen h8, and so we help our opponent play the move he wanted to play anyway, in hopes that he'll play it and give us a chance to get back in the game. Okay, well, bishop e8 was played, defending the diagonal. By the way, I should point out, bringing the rook back to c7 with the idea of discovering a defense is probably not going to work here either. It gets marked as inaccurate. I might just play e5 here. I get a star. If takes, then knight e4. And this really is looking good for white. All right, bishop e8 was his try. Queen h6. The bot saying, no, now you can play rook h1. Well, now rook takes c3 is tried, and so because that knight has been captured, do not play rook h1. It changes it back, because if you play rook h1, queen d4 again, and it's the same thing, it's just different, right? So if I play rook h1, look at the eval bar. Wow! And we have the same thing. Yes, you can take this, but I am back in this fight. Okay, right. Put the question to the queen. Okay. So b takes c3 is played. Rook takes pawn. Oof. The eval bar shot up even further. Queen e3 is being called for, but that now would allow me to play my rook over. You could defend with queen takes pawn, but g6. Oof, baby. Okay, rook takes c3 was played. G6 was played. Again, you've got to play the rook h1 at the right time. Not here. But g6 is the move. Pawn takes pawn, and now rook h1. Bada bang, bada boom. Well, queen d4 preventing queen h8 gets the question mark, ironically. Well, the thing is queen h7, and black resigns because it's a forced checkmate. Only one legal move, and then we're going to go ahead and give check, and mate is coming. All you can do is delay by throwing away pieces. Boom. So, a nice game by Bobby Fischer there. Let's look at the numbers on this one. Not so high this time. Bobby's accuracy only 89.2, and his single game rating only 2650. Alternatively, hold on, let me go back. He said instead of, oh, you mean instead of queen h7? Oh, yeah, I missed that. You're right. Oh, yeah. All he can do is block. That's even fasterer. That's even more fasterer. Fischer, Seb, give yourself a pat on the back. Well done. I missed the bishop. I was so focused over here on the H file, and I'm sure that's why Bobby played queen h7, because the focus was over here. But yeah, you've got that more fasterer check right there, which leads to more fasterer checkmate. Good catch there, Fischer, Seb.